Picture a room in Jerusalem. The year is approximately 30 AD. 12 men are seated around a teacher who has just told them something that makes no sense. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he says. "No one comes to the Father except through me." One of them leans forward. He has been listening carefully, maybe too carefully, and he has had enough of the metaphors. He speaks plainly, the way a man from a fishing town speaks when he has lost patience with poetry. "Lord," he says, "show us the Father. That is all we need. Just show us." The teacher looks at him, and the answer he gives is devastating in its simplicity. "Philip, have I been with you all this time, and you still do not know me?" That moment, that quiet rebuke, spoken with something between sorrow and love, is almost everything we know about the Apostle Philip. One question, one answer, and then silence. Philip disappears from the pages of history almost as completely as he arrived. But that silence hides something remarkable. Every year, on the 3rd of May, the Catholic and Anglican churches celebrate the feast of Saints Philip and James. 2 men, 2 apostles. 2 of the 12 people Jesus of Nazareth personally chose to carry his message to the world. And yet, if you asked most people on the street what they know about Philip or James the Less, they would give you almost nothing. Peter, they know. Paul, they know. John, Thomas, Judas. These names carry weight, carry story, carry legend. But Philip? James the Less? They are the quiet ones in the back of every painting of the Last Supper. So the question this video asks is simple. Who were they, really? What do we actually know? Not from legend, not from pious tradition, but from the best historical evidence we have. And why were they forgotten when others were not? Stay with me, because the answers are stranger and more human than you might expect. Let us begin with Philip, because Philip at least has a name that leaves traces. He was from Bethsaida, a small fishing town on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The name Bethsaida means house of fishing in Aramaic, and it was exactly that. A working-class community built around the lake, around nets and boats and the smell of fish at dawn. It was also, notably, the hometown of Peter and Andrew. Which means that when Jesus walked into that world and began calling followers, he was drawing from a single, tight-knit community. These men knew each other. They had likely grown up together. Philip's name is Greek, Philippos, meaning lover of horses. This is unusual for a Jewish fisherman from rural Galilee. It suggests, at minimum, that his family had some degree of Hellenistic influence, some contact with the broader Greek-speaking world that dominated the Eastern Mediterranean. Whether that shaped Philip's mind, his outlook, his way of asking questions, we can only speculate. But it is worth holding. The Gospel of John, the only gospel that gives Philip any real attention, tells us that Jesus found Philip and said 2 words to him, "Follow me." And Philip followed. No hesitation recorded, no dramatic backstory, just a man who, when called, went. But here's the first thing that separates Philip from the crowd. Immediately after being called, he goes to find his friend Nathanael. And what he says to Nathanael is one of the most quietly extraordinary sentences in the New Testament. "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Think about what Philip is doing here. He has known Jesus for perhaps a matter of hours, and he is already making a theological claim that would have sounded either profound or completely insane to a first-century Jewish ear. He is not saying, "I met a remarkable teacher." He is saying, "This is the one the entire tradition has been pointing toward."
And when Nathanael pushes back, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip does not argue. He does not cite scripture. He simply says, "Come and see." That is a remarkable instinct. Philip does not try to win the debate. He just says, "Encounter him yourself and decide." For a man who will later ask Jesus to show us the Father, there is something almost paradoxical about that. He is simultaneously a man who needs direct evidence, and a man who knows that direct evidence is the only argument worth making. The Gospel of John gives us two more moments where Philip speaks, and both of them reveal the same essential quality. A man who thinks in practical terms, who is anchored to the measurable world, and who therefore keeps running into the edges of something he cannot measure. The first is the feeding of the 5,000.
Jesus is looking at an enormous crowd. Thousands of people, hungry, far from any city. He turns to Philip, specifically to Philip, and asks, "Where are we going to buy bread for all these people to eat?" John adds a note that Jesus already knew what he was going to do. He was testing Philip. And Philip's answer is precise, almost mathematical. It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have even a bite. Philip has done the arithmetic. He has looked at the crowd, he has looked at the resources, and he has given you the gap between what is needed and what is possible. A fisherman's mind. A man who respects reality. He is not wrong. He is simply measuring the wrong thing. Then there is a moment near the end of Jesus' ministry. A group of Greeks, Gentiles, outsiders, approach one of the disciples. They do not go to Peter. They do not go to John. They come to Philip. Perhaps because of his Greek name. Perhaps because something in his manner suggested he was approachable, open to conversation across cultural lines. "Sir," they say, "we would like to see Jesus." Philip does not know what to do. He goes to Andrew. Together they bring the request to Jesus. It is a small moment, but it is telling. Philip is the bridge, the man at the intersection of worlds, and he is not entirely sure he belongs in that role. And then, the moment we began with, the Last Supper, hours before the crucifixion. Jesus has just delivered some of the most extraordinary words in the Gospel of John, about the Father's house, about going to prepare a place, about being the way and the truth and the life. And Philip says, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." It is not a stupid question. It is not even an unspiritual question. It is the most human question in the room. After 3 years, after miracles, after teachings, after everything, Philip still wants something he can see, something direct, something that closes the gap between faith and certainty once and for all. And Jesus answers him with something that must have stung, even as it was clearly spoken with love. "Don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been with you such a long time?" This is the last time Philip speaks in any gospel. But Philip's story does not end there, not even close. What happened to him after the resurrection, after Pentecost, after the early church scattered across the known world? That story is where things get genuinely complicated and genuinely fascinating. Before we follow Philip any further, we need to talk about the other man whose feast day shares the 3rd of May, James. Here is where history becomes almost comically unhelpful. There are multiple men named James in the New Testament. James the son of Zebedee, the one who was beheaded by Herod around 44 AD, one of the earliest martyrs among the 12. James the brother of the Lord, the leader of the Jerusalem church, a towering figure. And then there is the James who is listed among the 12 apostles, James the son of Alphaeus. This James is called, in tradition, James the Less, or in some translations, James the Younger. What exactly lesser or younger means has been debated for centuries. Shorter in stature? Younger in age? Less prominent in the community? All of the above? None of the above? We do not know. What we can say with confidence is this: the James who shares Philip's feast day, James the son of Alphaeus, appears in all 4 lists of the apostles in the New Testament. He is unambiguously one of the 12. And beyond those lists, he is almost completely silent. Not one word attributed to him in any gospel, not one story, not one moment where he asks a question or makes a mistake or says something memorable. He was there. He must have been there, listening, watching, following, and yet the record gives us nothing. There is something almost poignant about that. The man was present at the most consequential series of events in the history of Western civilization. He sat at that table. He watched. He believed enough to keep following even when things became dangerous. And history has given him a name in a list. Some scholars have proposed that this James might be the same person as James the brother of the Lord. That brother, in the first-century Jewish sense, could mean cousin, and that James, son of Alphaeus, and James, the relative of Jesus, might be one person. This view was popular in the early church and is still held in Catholic tradition, which identifies this James with the author of the Epistle of James. If that identification is correct, then James the Less is suddenly not less at all. He is a major figure, the author of one of the most practically minded documents in the New Testament, the leader of the Jerusalem church for decades. But that identification is contested. Many Protestant scholars, and some Catholic scholars, consider them separate people. And if they are separate, if James, son of Alphaeus, is simply himself and no one else, then we are left with a man whose interior life, whose contribution, whose fate, we cannot reconstruct with any confidence. And yet, tradition did not forget him entirely, because the early church, spread across Syria, Egypt, Persia, and beyond, preserved stories about these men, stories that cannot be verified as history, but cannot be dismissed as pure invention either. They are the memory of communities who believed they knew where these men had gone, what they had done, and how they had died. Let us be precise about what we mean by tradition here. In the study of early Christianity, tradition refers to texts and accounts that emerged in the decades and centuries after the New Testament, some from writers who had access to sources we no longer possess, some from communities with living memories of apostolic activity, and some that are clearly legendary elaborations. Sorting between these is genuinely difficult work, and scholars disagree. With that caveat firmly in place, here is what tradition says about Philip. Philip is said to have preached in Phrygia, in what is now central Turkey, and particularly in a city called Hierapolis. This is not implausible. Hierapolis was a significant Greek city, a place where a man with a Greek name and some Hellenistic cultural fluency might have found an audience. The early Christian writer Papias, who lived in the late 1st and early 2nd century and is one of our oldest sources, was himself bishop of Hierapolis. And Papias says that he knew the daughters of Philip the Apostle, who lived in that city and were known for their prophetic gifts. This is significant. Papias is close enough in time to the apostolic generation to be taken seriously as a source. If his Philip is the same Philip as the Apostle, and there is genuine debate about this, then we have real, early testimony that Philip ended his days in Asia Minor. The later Acts of Philip,
a text probably composed in the late 4th century, elaborates this into a full narrative of miracles, dramatic confrontations with local officials, a mission accompanied by his sister Mariamne and the apostle Bartholomew, and ultimately a martyrdom at Hierapolis. Philip is said to have been crucified upside down, like Peter. In one version of the story, Philip curses his persecutors as he dies, which causes the earth to open and swallow them, and then repents of the curse, asking God to forgive them. It is a deeply human touch. Even in a legendary text, Philip is still the man who feels the gap between what he knows he should do and what his very human anger makes him want to do.
Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the early 4th century, and one of the most important historians of the early church, refers to Philip's tomb at Hierapolis. And archaeological work at Hierapolis in modern Turkey has, in the early 2000s, uncovered what appears to be a martyrion, a memorial building, associated with Philip. That is not nothing. That is a real building, built by real people, who believed that a real man had died there and was worth remembering. For James the Less, tradition is thinner and less consistent. Some Eastern Christian traditions associate him with a mission in Persia. Others place him in Egypt or in the regions around Judea itself. The Armenians claim him as one of the first evangelists of their region. None of these claims can be verified. The most consistent element in tradition is his martyrdom, that James was killed, either by being thrown from a height, beaten with a club, or some combination of both. If he is indeed the same James as the leader of the Jerusalem church, then we have much better historical footing. The Jewish historian Josephus records the execution of James, the brother of Jesus, around 62 AD, stoned by order of the high priest Ananus. That is external, non-Christian corroboration. It is as solid as ancient history gets. But if James, son of Alphaeus, is a separate person, then his end is a mystery. And perhaps that is the most honest thing we can say about him. He was one of 12 men chosen for a task that most of the world considered impossible. He did his part, whatever that part was, and the record closed before we could read it. Here is what I find remarkable about both of these men, and about the question this video began with. We live in a culture obsessed with legacy, with being remembered, with leaving a mark that history cannot ignore. And so we naturally gravitate toward the Peters and the Pauls, the men whose letters we can read, whose journeys we can trace, whose influence we can measure in centuries of theology and institutional history. But Philip and James remind us of something different. Something harder to articulate, but worth sitting with on the 3rd of May, or on any day when the work you are doing feels invisible. Philip was the man who needed to see. He needed direct evidence. He needed to close the gap between faith and certainty. He kept asking the honest question, the embarrassing question, the one everyone else was perhaps too proud to ask. And Jesus did not rebuke him for asking it. He answered it. He said, "Philip, look at me. You want to see the Father? You have been looking at him the whole time." That is a staggering answer. And Philip, the man who kept asking, was the one who received it. James the Less gave us something different. He gave us the example of faithfulness without fanfare. A presence without performance. He was there. Through the calling, through the teaching, through the arrest and the trial and the crucifixion and the resurrection appearances and the terrifying first days of a movement that the whole Roman Empire wanted to extinguish. He was there, and he stayed. We do not know his words. We do not have his letters. We cannot reconstruct his face or his voice, or his particular way of understanding what he had witnessed. But his name is in the list. And the list is there because the 12 were there. And the church, with all its history, its failures, its reformations, its enduring presence across 20 centuries, grew, in part, from the soil that anonymous men like James quietly tended. Every year on the 3rd of May, those who observe the liturgical calendar light a candle, metaphorically or literally, for 2 men who did not leave us much. A fisherman from Bethsaida who needed to see.
and whose question became, forever, the most honest question in the upper room. And a man whose name appears in a list, whose faithfulness we cannot doubt and whose story we cannot tell, and who may be the most honest mirror the church holds up to the rest of us, the ordinary ones, the ones history will not record, the ones who showed up anyway. Philip asked, "Show us the Father." And the answer, 2,000 years later, is still the same. Not a vision. Not a sign from the sky. Just this: open your eyes to what has been in front of you the whole time. That is their legacy. Not monuments, not great speeches, not conquests. Just the courage to ask honestly, and the fidelity to stay. On the 3rd of May, and on every ordinary day that asks the same of us, that is more than enough.
Because of the unpredictable behavior of the YouTube algorithm, this channel might never appear to you again. Subscribe to avoid that. Like it if this video made any difference in your life, and share this content to your family and friends. Grace and peace.